Jake Morrison walked through the glass doors of the Galactic Educational Institute and stopped to look around. The building was huge and made of smooth white stone that seemed to glow with its own light. Students of all shapes and sizes moved through the wide hallways. Some looked like tall plants with leaves for arms. Others were made of what looked like living rock. A few seemed to float in the air without touching the ground. Jake adjusted his backpack on his shoulders and checked the small device on his wrist. The translator would help him understand what everyone was saying. He was the first human to ever study at this school. Most of the other species had never seen a human before. He could feel their eyes watching him as he walked past. The school was on a planet called Zenthara Prime. It was a peaceful world with 3 purple suns and pink grass that grew in perfect circles. The air smelled like flowers and tasted sweet. Everything here was safe and calm. It's very different from Earth. Jake found his classroom and took a deep breath before walking in. The room was large, with white walls and no windows. Strange blue lights hung from the ceiling and made everything look soft. There were no desks like on Earth. Instead, there were floating platforms that could change shape to fit. Different types of students. 5 other students were already in the room. They all turned to look at Jake when he entered. He could see the fear in their eyes. Word had traveled fast about the new human student. Everyone knew that humans came from what they called a death world. The first student Jake noticed was made of clear crystal. Light passed through her body and made rainbow colors on the walls. She had arms and legs like a human, but her face was angular with sharp edges. When she saw Jake, small cracks appeared. On her surface, it made tiny ringing sounds. "I am Kirith," she said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "I come from the planet Celeste, where we are made of living crystal. We do not have predators on our world." Next to her sat a student who looked like a pile of gray rocks, shaped into the form of a person. He was 3 times larger than Jake and had small gems for eyes. When he spoke, his voice was deep and slow, like distant thunder. "I am called Rumble," he said. "My people are from Granite 7. We eat minerals and have no need to hunt. We have heard stories about your kind. They say humans kill other creatures for food." Jake wanted to explain that most humans buy their food from stores now, but before he could speak, another student drifted closer. This one was hard to see clearly. She looked like she was made of mist or smoke. Her outline kept changing, and she seemed to glow with a soft silver light. "And whisper," she said, but her voice came from inside Jake's head instead of through his ears. "I am telepathic. I can feel the thoughts of others. Your mind is very strange. It is full of images of dangerous creatures, but you are not afraid of them." The 4th student looked like a person made of flowers and vines. Her skin was green and smooth like a leaf. Small purple flowers grew in her hair, and her eyes were the color of spring grass. She was beautiful but seemed very fragile. "My name is Zaranel," she said in a voice as soft as a whisper. "I come from the garden worlds where all life grows in harmony. We have never known violence or death. The stories about your planet frighten me." The last student was the strangest of all. Looked almost human, but his skin was blue, and he had 4 arms instead of 2. His eyes were completely black with no white parts. He wore a robe that changed colors as he moved. "I am Flexen," he said. "My people have studied many worlds. We know about Earth and its dangers. Should not be here with peaceful students." Jake found an empty floating platform and sat down. The platform adjusted itself to fit his body shape. It was surprisingly comfortable. The other students moved their platforms further away from him. The crystal student, Kirith, made more ringing sounds as new cracks appeared on her arms. "I'm just here to learn," Jake said quietly, "same as all of you." Before anyone could respond, the teacher entered the room. Professor Vexty was tall and thin with green skin that looked like it was covered in scales. He had 4 arms, and his head was shaped like a triangle. 6 eyes were arranged around his face, and they could all move independently. He wore a long white coat that marked him as a teacher. "Welcome, students," Professor Vexty said. His voice was high and sharp like a bird's call. "Today we begin our study of dangerous life forms from across the galaxy. This is an advanced class and not for the weak of heart." All of his eyes turned to look at Jake, We have a new student joining us. Jake Morrison from the planet Earth. I am sure you all know the reputation of his homeworld. The other students shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. Rumble's gem eyes glowed brighter. Whisper's misty form flickered. Zeranel's flowers closed up tight. Professor Vextai moved to the front of the room where a large metal box sat on a table. The box was covered in warning symbols and had thick cables running from it to the wall. Blue energy fields shimmered around it. Today we will observe a live specimen, the professor said. One of the most dangerous predators known to galactic science. The Catherian Shadowcat. Kirith made a sound like breaking glass. Rumble rolled himself into a ball. Whisper's form became so faint, she was almost invisible. Zeranel's flowers wilted completely. Even Flexen backed away from the table despite his claims of superior knowledge. Jake leaned forward with interest. He had read about Shadowcats in his preparation materials. They were native to a world of eternal darkness and were perfect hunters. They could phase in and out of solid matter, and their claws could cut through almost anything. The specimen is safely contained, Professor Vextai continued. Multiple energy fields keep it secure. We will observe its behavior and study its hunting instincts. This will help us understand how predators think and move. The professor's eyes all focused on different parts of the room as he spoke. Remember? This creature is extremely dangerous. It has killed trained hunters and escaped from maximum security facilities. Do not make sudden movements or loud noises. Stay in your seats at all times. Jake could see his fellow students were terrified. Their fear was so strong he could almost taste it in the air. On Earth, he had worked with his family at a wildlife center. They took care of injured animals and helped them return to the wild. He had been around dangerous predators before, but these alien students had never experienced anything like this. The irony was not lost on Jake. Here he was, supposedly the dangerous one from the Deathworld, surrounded by students who were afraid of him. But now they were all about to face something that truly was dangerous. Suddenly, he was the one with experience. Professor Vextai began activating the containment field controls. Blue lights flickered around the metal box. Hear a low humming sound as the energy systems powered up. Somewhere inside that box was one of the galaxy's most feared predators. The other students moved their platforms as far from the table as possible. They huddled together at the back of the room like frightened children. Only Jake remained close to the front, watching with calm curiosity as the professor prepared to show them something that had never been displayed to students before. The lesson was about to begin, and none of them knew that everything was about to go very wrong. Professor Vextai pressed a button on the control panel, and the metal box began to open. The energy fields around it glowed brighter as layers of protection activated. Jake could see through the blue shimmer into the container. At first, there was nothing visible inside except darkness. The Catherian Shadowcat is a master of stealth, the professor explained. His 6 eyes moved independently as he spoke, some watching the container while others kept track of his students. It can make itself invisible and phase through solid matter. This makes it nearly impossible to hunt or capture. Slowly, a shape began to form inside the containment field. It looked like smoke at first, then gradually became more solid. Creature was about the size of a large dog, but built like a cat. Its fur was completely black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes glowed with a pale green light that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Shadowcat moved with perfect silence. Its paws never seemed to touch the bottom of the container as it paced back and forth. When it turned its head, Jake could see rows of sharp white teeth and claws that looked like they were made of metal. Kirith made a high ringing sound and new cracks spread across her crystal body. The sound was like glass breaking in slow motion. She tried to move her platform further back, but it was already against the wall. Rumble had rolled himself into a tight ball with only his gem eyes visible. The eyes glowed red with fear and his rocky surface trembled. Small pieces of stone fell from his body and clattered on the floor. Whisper had become so faint that she was barely visible. Her telepathic voice spoke in everyone's minds, filled with panic. I can feel its thoughts. It thinks only of hunting and killing. There is no mercy in its mind, no kindness, only the need to hunt. Zaranel was in the worst state of all. Flowers had completely closed and her green skin had turned pale yellow. She was shaking so badly that her leaves were falling off. Tears that looked like morning dew ran down her face. Even Flexen, who had claimed to know about dangerous worlds, was pressed against the far wall. His forearms were wrapped around himself and his color-changing robe had turned a sickly gray. Only Jake remained calm. He watched the shadow cat with interest rather than fear. The creature reminded him of the mountain lions he had helped care for at his family's wildlife center. They were dangerous predators, but they were also beautiful and intelligent animals. Professor Vextai continued his lecture, though his voice was not as steady as before. The shadow cat hunts by scent and movement, can track prey across vast distances, and remembers the scent of every creature it has encountered. Its claws can cut through metal, and its bite can crush bone, as if responding to the professor's words. The shadow cat suddenly looked directly at the students. Its glowing green eyes scanned the room, and Jake could see its nostrils flaring as it tested the air. The creature was taking in all their scents, cataloging each one. "Notice how it studies us," Professor Vexday said, trying to maintain his teaching tone. "It is deciding which of us would be the easiest prey. The shadow cat always attacks the weakest target first." The creature's eyes lingered on Zaranel, who whimpered and tried to make herself smaller. Then its gaze moved to Kirith, whose crystal form was now covered in stress cracks. Finally, it looked at Jake. For a long moment, human and alien predator stared at each other. Jake felt no fear, only curiosity. The shadow cat tilted its head slightly, as if puzzled by this strange creature that did not smell of fear like the others. Suddenly, the lights in the classroom flickered. The blue energy fields around the container wavered and sparked. Professor Vexdai's eyes all turned to the control panel in alarm. "Power fluctuation," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "The Academy's main generator must be having problems." Again, the lights flickered again, longer this time. The energy fields around the shadow cat's container dimmed and pulsed irregularly. Jake could see the professor frantically pressing buttons and adjusting controls, but nothing seemed to help. "Stay calm," Professor Vextai called to his students, though his own voice was anything but calm. "The backup systems will activate in a moment," but the backup systems did not activate. Instead, the power failed completely. The room plunged into darkness for several seconds. When the emergency lights came on, they cast everything in a dim red glow, and the energy fields around the shadow cat's container were completely gone. The metal box sat open and empty. The shadow cat was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was complete except for the sound of Kirith's crystal body cracking and Zaranel's quiet sobbing. Then Whisper's telepathic scream filled everyone's minds. "It's free. I can sense it. It's in the room with us." Chaos erupted. Rumble unrolled from his ball and tried to roll toward the door, but his massive weight made him slow and clumsy. Kirith shattered completely into thousands of crystal fragments that immediately began trying to pull themselves back together. Her reformation would take several minutes. Leaving her completely helpless, Flexen pressed himself against the wall, and his robe turned bright yellow in panic. He was making high-pitched squealing sounds, and all four of his arms were shaking. Zaronal collapsed completely. Her flower body folded in on itself, and she began to wilt rapidly. On her homeworld, extreme fear could actually kill her kind by causing their life systems to shut down. Professor Xtai was frantically trying to restart the containment system. His 6 eyes darted in all directions while his hands worked the controls. "Emergency Protocol 7, he shouted. "All students evacuate immediately." But none of the students could move, were frozen in terror. Whisper's voice echoed in their minds again. "I can feel it hunting. It's choosing its target. It wants the plant girl. She smells like prey." Jake turned toward Zarenal and saw her lying helpless on the floor. Her platform had stopped floating and deposited her in a wilted heap. She was barely conscious and completely unable to defend herself or run away. Then Jake saw it. Shh. That was darker than the other shadows moved along the wall. The Shadowcat had materialized just enough to be visible in the dim emergency lighting. It was stalking towards Aranel with perfect predator instincts. The creature moved without making any sound. Its paws seemed to float just above the floor. Its eyes were locked on the helpless plant girl, and its claws were extended. Jake could see its muscles bunching as it prepared to pounce. Professor Vexty was still working desperately at the controls. "I can't restart the containment field without main power," he called out. "The security team will be here soon, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew that security would not arrive in time to save Zaranel. The Shadowcat crouched low, and its tail twitched once. That was the only warning before it would spring forward and attack its chosen prey. The other students could only watch in horror as the galaxy's most dangerous predator prepared to kill their classmate. But Jake was not frozen like the others. While everyone else panicked, his mind was working clearly. He had spent years around dangerous predators on Earth. He knew how they thought and moved. He could read the signs in the Shadowcat's body language. More importantly, he was not afraid. Jake stood up slowly and took a step toward the Shadowcat. Then another step. He was walking directly toward the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy, and he looked completely calm about it. "Jake, no," Professor Vexty shouted. "Get back. You'll be killed." But Jake ignored the warning and continued walking forward. He had a plan, and it was about to shock everyone in the room. Jake moved slowly across the classroom floor. His steps were careful and quiet. He kept his breathing steady and his hands relaxed at his sides. The red emergency lights made everything look like it was covered in blood, but Jake's expression remained calm. The Shadowcat had frozen in its crouch when Jake started moving. Its glowing green eyes shifted from Zaranel to this strange new creature that was walking toward it instead of running away.
The predator's head tilted slightly as
it tried to understand what was happening. Professor Vexty's 6 eyes were all focused on Jake now. "Stop," he whispered urgently. "You don't understand what you're doing. That creature will tear you apart." But Jake did understand. He had worked with mountain lions, bears, and wolves at his family's wildlife center. He knew that most predators were not mindless killing machines. They were intelligent animals that followed patterns and instincts. The key was to understand those patterns and work with them instead of against them. Whispers telepathic. Voice filled everyone's minds, trembling with fear. "I can sense its confusion. Doesn't know why this human is not afraid. It's hunting. Instincts are conflicted." Jake took another step forward. He was now only about 10 feet away from the Shadowcat, close enough to see the individual whiskers on its face and the way its ears twitched at every small sound. The creature was beautiful in a deadly way. Like a work of art made from shadows and starlight, Rumble had managed to roll himself into a corner where he felt safer. His gem eyes watched Jake with amazement. "He's going to get himself killed," Rumble said in his deep, slow voice. "No creature walks toward a Shadowcat. Goes against every survival instinct in the galaxy." Flexen was pressed so hard against the wall that his blue skin had turned white with terror. "This is madness," he whispered. "Humans really are insane. The stories about Deathworlders are all true." The Shadowcat rose from its crouch, but did not spring forward. Instead, it took a step back. Its eyes never left Jake's face. The creature was trying to decide if this human was a threat, prey, or something else entirely. Jake slowly lowered himself into a crouch. He made himself smaller and less threatening. This was something he had learned from working with scared animals on Earth. Big, tall shapes looked dangerous. Small, low shapes looked safe. "Easy," Jake said in a soft, quiet voice. "Nobody's going to hurt you. I know you're scared." The alien students could not believe what they were hearing. Jake was talking to the galaxy's most feared predator-like. It was a frightened house pet. Kirith had managed to pull most of her crystal fragments back together, though she was still missing pieces and looked cracked all over. "Scared?" She chimed in disbelief. "He thinks the Shadowcat is scared. It's a perfect killing machine." But Jake could see what the others could not. The Shadowcat's ears were not pressed forward in attack mode. They were flattened back against its head, which was a sign of anxiety and uncertainty. Its tail was not lashing back and forth like an angry cat. Instead, it was tucked low and twitching nervously. The creature was not in hunting mode. It was in defense mode. It was confused and frightened by being in an unfamiliar place with strange smells and sounds. Jake began making soft clicking sounds with his tongue. This was a noise that seemed to calm most mammals, whether they were from Earth or elsewhere. The sound was gentle and non-threatening, like a mother calling to her babies. The shadow cat's ears perked up slightly at the sound. Its head tilted the other way, and its glowing eyes seemed less fierce and more curious. Professor Vexty was still trying to restart the containment system, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the controls. "The security team is on their way," he called out. "They have energy weapons that can stun the creature. Just try to stay alive until they get here." Jake ignored the professor's words, continued making the soft clicking sounds, and began to extend one hand very slowly toward the shadow cat. His palm was turned upward in a gesture of peace that was universal among most species. "You're not a monster," Jake said quietly to the creature. "You're just lost and confused." "I know how that feels." Zarenal was still lying in a wilted heap on the floor, but she was conscious enough to watch what was happening. Leaf-like skin had turned from green to pale yellow with fear. "He's going to touch it," she whispered. "The human is actually going to touch the shadow cat." The predator sniffed at the air around Jake's extended hand. Its black nose twitched as it took in his scent. Jake could see the creature's confusion growing. He did not smell like the other creatures in the room. He did not smell of fear and panic. Instead, he smelled calm and confident. Jake had learned long ago that animals could sense emotions through scent. Fear had a sharp, sour smell that made predators more aggressive. Calmness had a different scent that made them curious instead of hostile. The shadow cat took a cautious step forward, then another. Its movements were no longer the smooth, deadly stalk of a hunter. Now it moved like a house cat approaching a stranger, curious but ready to flee at any moment. Whisper's telepathic voice was filled with amazement. "Its thoughts are changing. The killing instinct is fading. It's becoming curious about the human." Jake remained perfectly still as the shadow cat approached his outstretched hand. The creature's glowing eyes studied his face, looking for any sign of threat or deception. Jake met its gaze calmly, without the direct stare that predators saw as a challenge. "That's right," Jake said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. You don't need to hurt anyone else either." The tip of the shadow cat's nose touched Jake's palm. The creature jerked back immediately, startled by the contact. But after a moment, it leaned forward again and sniffed more carefully at his hand. Jake could feel the warmth of the creature's breath on his skin. Up close, he could see that its fur was not completely black. There were subtle patterns of darker and lighter shades that helped it blend with shadows. Its eyes were not just green, but had flecks of gold and silver that made them look like tiny galaxies. Professor Vexty had stopped trying to work on the containment system. All 6 of his eyes were focused on Jake and the shadow cat. "Possible," he breathed. "In 300 years of galactic science, no one has ever made peaceful contact with a shadow cat." The creature seemed to make a decision, pressed its nose firmly against Jake's palm and took a deeper breath, memorizing his scent. Then, to everyone's complete shock, it rubbed the side of its head against his hand. The shadow cat was asking to be petted. Jake smiled and gently scratched behind the creature's ears. The fur was softer than he had expected, like touching a warm shadow. The shadow cat closed its eyes and began to make a sound that Jake recognized immediately. It was purring. The sound filled the classroom like distant thunder. It was deeper and more resonant than any earth cat's purr, but it was unmistakably a sound of contentment and pleasure. Rumble's gem eyes grew wide with wonder. It's happy. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy is happy." Flexon uncurled himself from the wall, his robe slowly changing from panic yellow back to its normal shifting colors. "How is this possible?" "Shadow cats don't purr. They don't show affection. They only kill." Jake continued, scratching behind the creature's ears, while he explained, "Every animal needs to feel safe and understood, even predators. Fear makes them dangerous. Take away the fear, and you find out what they really are underneath. The shadow cat pressed closer to Jake, clearly enjoying the attention. Its purring grew louder, and its tail began to twitch in a playful way, rather than an aggressive one. Jake slowly stood up, keeping one hand on the creature's head. The shadow cat stood as well, staying close to his side like a giant, deadly pet. Jake kept his hand on the shadow cat's head as he slowly stood up. The creature pressed against his leg like a house cat seeking attention from its owner. Its purring filled the room with a deep rumbling sound that seemed to make the walls vibrate. The alien students watched in complete amazement. Everything they had been taught about shadow cats was being proven wrong right before their eyes. This was supposed to be a mindless killing machine, but it was acting like a gentle pet. Professor Vextai had given up on the containment controls completely. All 6 of his eyes were fixed on Jake and the creature. This should not be possible, he said in a shaky voice. Shadow cats have never shown affection toward any living being. They exist only to hunt and kill. Jake looked up at the professor while continuing to pet the creature. Maybe that's because no one ever tried to understand them before. On Earth, we learned that even the most dangerous animals have feelings and needs beyond just hunting. The shadow cat looked up at Jake with its glowing green eyes. The fierce, predatory look was completely gone. Instead, its expression was almost like a smile. It rubbed its head against Jake's hand again, asking for more scratches. Whisper's telepathic voice spoke in everyone's minds, filled with wonder. I can read its thoughts now. Before, there was only hunting instinct and confusion. Now its mind is calm and happy. It trusts the human completely. Kirith had managed to rebuild most of her crystal body, though she still had cracks running through her arms and face. But why? She chimed. What makes this human different? Why does the creature trust him when it has never trusted anyone before? Jake thought about how to explain it in a way the alien students would understand. Where I come from, we grow up around dangerous animals. We learn to read their body language and understand their emotions. This shadow cat wasn't acting like a hunter when it escaped. It was acting like a scared, confused animal. He pointed to the creature's ears, which were now relaxed and forward-facing. See how its ears are positioned? When it first escaped, they were flat against its head. That means fear, not aggression. Its tail was tucked low, not raised high like a confident predator. All the signs were there. Rumble slowly unrolled himself from his defensive position. In the corner, his gem eyes glowed with curiosity instead of fear. You could read all of that from just looking at it? Practice, Jake said simply. I've been working with animals since I was a child. My family runs a wildlife center where we help injured predators recover and return to the wild. You learn to understand them, or you get hurt. The shadow cat seemed to sense that everyone was talking about it. It looked around the room at the other students, no longer seeing them as potential prey. Its gaze lingered on Zerenel, who was still lying in a wilted heap on the floor. Jake noticed the creature's interest in the plant girl. I think it wants to apologize, he said. Shadow cats are intelligent. It knows it scared everyone. Apologize, Flexen said from his position against the wall. His robe was slowly changing from panic colors back to normal shades. Predators don't apologize. They don't have emotions like that. But the shadow cat was already moving toward Zeronal. Jake walked beside it, keeping one hand on its back to maintain the connection they had formed. The creature approached the frightened plant girl very slowly and carefully. Zerenel looked up with terrified green eyes as the predator came closer. Her flowers were still tightly closed, and her skin had faded to an unhealthy pale color. She tried to move away, but was too weak from fear to stand. The shadow cat stopped about 3 feet away from her and lowered itself to the ground. It laid its head on its paws in a submissive position that clearly showed it meant no harm. Then it began to purr softly, a gentle sound that was very different from the loud rumbling it had made before. Jake knelt down beside the creature. It's trying to show her that it's sorry, he explained. This is how predators show submission and peaceful intent on many worlds. Zerenel stared at the shadow cat in disbelief. Slowly, very slowly, one of her flowers began to open. It was a small purple bloom that unfurled like a tiny sunrise. The sight of it seemed to please the Shadowcat. His purring became slightly louder. Professor Vextai was taking notes on a small device, his hands shaking with excitement rather than fear now. Remarkable. The creature is displaying social behaviors that have never been documented before. It appears to have empathy. The Shadowcat raised its head and looked at Jake, as if asking for permission to come closer to Zaranel. Jake nodded and spoke softly to both of them. "It's okay," he said to Zaranel. "It won't hurt you. It just wants to show you that it's friendly now." The plant girl's voice was barely a whisper. "But it's a predator. It was going to eat me," Jake said gently. It was scared and confused. When animals are scared, they sometimes act aggressive, even when they don't want to hurt anyone. It just wanted to find a safe place to hide. The Shadowcat crawled forward on its belly, moving like a dog trying to show it was harmless. When it reached Zaranel, it very gently touched her hand with its nose. The contact was so light, it was barely noticeable. Zaranel gasped, but not from fear this time. Where the Shadowcat's nose had touched her, her pale skin began to return to its normal green color. More of her flowers started to open, creating small spots of purple and white, beauty against her leaf-like skin. "It's warm," she whispered in amazement. Its touch is warm and gentle. The Shadowcat settled down next to Zaranel, careful not to put its weight on her delicate form. It continued purring softly, and the sound seemed to help her recover from her fear-induced wilting. Kirith made a musical chiming sound that indicated wonder rather than fear. The plant girl is healing. Shadowcat's presence is actually helping her recover. Jake smiled and continued petting the creature. Animals have healing energy. On Earth, we use therapy animals to help people feel better when they're sick or scared. Different species can help each other if they're willing to try. Whisper drifted closer, her misty form becoming more solid as her fear faded. Its thoughts are so different now. There is kindness there, and curiosity about all of us. It wants to understand us just as much as we want to understand it. The Shadowcat looked up at Whisper and made a soft chirping sound, almost like a bird. It was clearly trying to communicate with the telepathic being in a friendly way. Rumble began rolling closer, his fear completely gone now. If a human from a death world can make friends with a Shadowcat, maybe the stories about dangerous creatures are not complete. Maybe there is more to learn. Professor Vextai had stopped trying to restart the containment system entirely. Instead, he was observing and recording everything that happened. "Hey, this changes everything we know about predator behavior," he said. "We must document every detail." Jake stood up and looked around the room. All of the students were now watching with fascination instead of terror. The Shadowcat remained lying peacefully next to Zaranel, who was almost completely recovered from her fear wilting. "Security team will be here soon," Jake said. "We need to get our friend back into its container before they arrive with stun weapons." The Shadowcat looked up at him and tilted its head. It seemed to understand that it needed to return to the containment area, but it did not want to leave its new friends. Jake knelt down and scratched behind its ears one more time. "I know you don't want to go back in the box, but it's the safest place for you right now. Don't worry, I'll make sure they treat you better from now on." The creature stood up and nuzzled Jake's hand one final time. Then it walked calmly toward the open containment box, showing complete trust in the human who had become its friend. The Shadowcat walked slowly toward the open containment box. It paused at the edge and looked back at Jake one more time. Its green eyes seemed to say thank you before it stepped inside and settled down peacefully. Jake could hear it purring softly, even as Professor Vextai reactivated the energy fields. The blue shimmer of the containment field surrounded the creature once again. But this time, the Shadowcat did not pace or prowl. Instead, it curled up like a house cat taking a nap. Its eyes remained open and watching Jake with what looked like affection. Just as the containment field fully stabilized, the classroom door burst open. 6 security guards rushed in carrying energy weapons and wearing heavy protective armor. They looked around the room expecting to find chaos and injured students. Instead, they found everyone sitting calmly and a peacefully contained Shadowcat. "What happened here?" the lead security officer asked. She was a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms and compound eyes like an insect. We received an emergency alert about a containment breach. Professor Vextai gestured toward Jake with all 6 of his eyes focused on the human student. We had a breach, but it has been resolved, thanks to our exchange student from Earth. The security officer looked at Jake with surprise. Student handled a loose shadowcat. That's impossible. I saw it with my own eyes, Kirith chimed in. Her crystal body was still cracked from the stress, but her voice was clear and strong. The human walked right up to the creature and made friends with it. He touched it, and it purred like a pet. The security guards looked at each other in disbelief. Shadowcats were the reason they carried the heaviest weapons and wore the thickest armor. The idea that a student had petted one was beyond their understanding. Rumble rolled forward, his gem eyes glowing brightly. The human showed us that the creature was not evil. It was just scared and confused. When he treated it with kindness, it became gentle. Whisper's telepathic voice spoke to everyone in the room. I could read its thoughts the entire time. The killing instinct disappeared when it felt safe and understood. The human created peace where we all expected violence. Zaranel had recovered completely from her fear wilting. Her flowers were fully open, and her green skin glowed with health. She stood up from where she had been lying and walked over to Jake. You saved my life, she said softly. The Shadowcat was going to attack me, but you stopped it without any weapons or violence. You just ... understood it. Jake looked embarrassed by all the attention. I only did what anyone who understands animals would do. The Shadowcat wasn't really dangerous. It was just in an unfamiliar place with strange smells and sounds. It needed someone to help it feel safe. The security officer was taking notes on everything the student said. This is highly unusual. We need to file a complete report. What exactly did you do to calm the creature? Jake thought for a moment before answering. I watched its body language and listened to the sounds it made. I could tell it was anxious rather than aggressive, so I approached it the same way I would approach any scared animal back home. Professor Vextai stepped forward, his excitement obvious in the way all his eyes were moving rapidly. Students, what we witnessed today will change how we study dangerous life forms. Jake has shown us that understanding and empathy can be more powerful than weapons and barriers. Flexen had moved away from the wall, and his robe was now cycling through colors of amazement and respect. I was wrong about humans. I thought being from a death world made them violent and dangerous. But Jake used his experience with predators to create peace instead of causing harm. The lead security officer looked at the containment field where the Shadowcat was still resting peacefully. We've been using stun weapons and heavy restraints on these creatures for decades. But look at it now, it's completely calm. Jake walked over to the containment field, and the Shadowcat immediately perked up. It came to the edge of the field closest to him and began purring again. The sound filled the room with its deep, pleasant rumble. It remembers you, Whisper said in amazement. Its thoughts are focused on you, thinks of you as a friend and protector. One of the security guards, a small reptilian being with silver scales, lowered his weapon completely. In 20 years of security work, I've never seen anything like this. That creature would normally be trying to break through the field to attack us. Instead, it's acting like a pet. Professor Vextai began pacing excitedly around the room. We must revise our entire curriculum. If Jake can form a bond with a Shadowcat, imagine what else we might learn about supposedly dangerous species. Perhaps many creatures we fear are simply misunderstood. The news of what happened in the classroom spread quickly throughout the academy. Within hours, students and teachers from other departments were coming to see the famous human who had tamed a Shadowcat. Jake found himself answering the same questions over and over again. How did you know it wouldn't attack you? Asked a floating jellyfish-like being from the astronomy department. I didn't know for sure, Jake admitted, but I could see that it was scared rather than angry. Most animals, even predators, don't want to fight unless they have to. They prefer to avoid danger when possible, so a group of young students from various species gathered around Jake during lunch break. They all wanted to hear the story of the Shadowcat again. Among them was a small, furry creature that looked like a teddy bear with 6 legs. Are all humans as brave as you? Small creature asked in a squeaky voice. Jake smiled and shook his head. I'm not really brave. It's just doing what I learned. Growing up on Earth, where I come from, we have to live alongside dangerous animals. We learn to understand them instead of just fearing them. Back in Professor Vexty's classroom, preparations were being made for a special presentation. The Academy's directors had decided that Jake's experience should be shared with students and faculty from across the galaxy. They wanted to use his methods to develop new approaches for studying dangerous life forms. Kirith had completely repaired her crystal body and was helping to set up recording equipment. Jake, you have changed how we think about predators and about humans. Before today, we were all afraid of you because you came from a death world. Now we understand that your dangerous planet taught you wisdom, not violence. Rumble was also helping. With preparations using his great strength to move heavy equipment, the stories about Deathworlders were incomplete. They spoke only of humans being tough and dangerous. They did not mention that you were also kind and understanding. Professor, Vexty approached Jake with a formal-looking document. The Academy's Board of Directors has asked me to offer you a special position. They want you to help develop new protocols for handling dangerous specimens. Your insight could revolutionize xenobiology. Jake looked at the document with surprise. You want me to help teach other students how to work with dangerous animals? More than that, Professor Vexty explained. We want you to help us understand that dangerous might not mean what we thought it meant. Perhaps many species we avoid could become allies if we approach them with the right knowledge and attitude. Zorano brought Jake a flower from her homeworld as a gift. It was a beautiful white bloom that glowed softly in the dim light. This flower only grows when there is perfect harmony between different life forms. I want you to have it as a symbol of what you accomplished today. As Jake accepted the flower, the shadow cat in its containment field began purring again. The sound seemed to express approval and happiness. The creature had found a friend who understood it, and through that friendship had shown an entire academy. That fear and understanding could not exist in the same place. The galaxy suddenly seemed like a smaller, friendlier place where different species could learn from each other instead of just being afraid. And it all started with one human who refused to run away from something that others thought was a monster.